of Green Thumbs and Good Vibes, your podcast, all about cultivating fruits and vegetables and the great lifestyle that comes along with it. We're your hosts, as always, Colin and Mitchell, and we are so glad that you chose to join us today. Today, we're going to be talking about transplanting those seedlings into your garden and all the different things to take into consideration when doing that process. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy the podcast. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on this one. Guys, if you've been listening to our previous podcasts, you should have all the knowledge to get yourself here, what to do when choosing seeds, how to choose what you want to grow this year, even what to grow it in, and our personal favorites. So now we're going to get into, okay, you've done it. You've grown your seedlings. Now what, right? So the first thing to take into consideration is, how do you know that you've reached that stage? You have your seedlings growing indoors, most likely, maybe under a light, or maybe you've moved them outside into a small greenhouse or something like that. Great. Or even just outside if it's warm enough where you are. Well, here's how you know it's time to put them in the ground or in your beds. You want to look for the true leaves. So let's go ahead and define what that is. When you're growing any plant from seed, but most specifically vegetables, we find there are an initial set of leaves. Those are what we're going to call the seedling leaves, which means that they usually don't show the same characteristics as the final leaves when the plant is fully grown. Okay. So then those first leaves that come up showing those characteristics, let's just say, a cucumber leaf. When you're growing a cucumber from seed, the first two leaves are round, kind of a football shape. But then the next two leaves are more of that triangle or diamond shape. And those are what we call the true leaves. Okay. So now that you know that you're looking for those true leaves, great. You've found the first set, and then you want to look for an additional set. So that means 4 total true leaves. Okay. Excuse me. When you've reached that, then you know it's time to go ahead and put it in the garden. So you also want to look at a few different additional things. So this is a good rule of thumb, but there are some plants where this isn't going to apply. Um, you know, for instance, a lot of people say, wait till your plants are 4 inches tall. That's a great advice for most plants, but something like corn, a grass, right? Still edible, probably isn't going to be ready at the 4 inch mark. It's going to wait till maybe 6 inches or something like that to be ready to really plant out. So there's always exceptions to all of these rules, but just something to keep in mind. And then you also want to take into consideration, exactly how hardy the plant is, and if it's maybe something that's going to struggle with a weather change or a change in the amount of light it gets or the amount of water or anything like that, you might want to start um, a week, let's just say, something like that, before it's time to go ahead and plant them out, and start giving them exposure to the sun, maybe even placing them in the bed, ideally where they're going to eventually be, so that they can get some of that. Wind is a good element that they might not be getting if you're, let's say, inside or even in a greenhouse setup. Um, so that's something that can help increase the hardiness of the plant and also increase your success when it's time to transplant. So I think that's all as far as this category of, okay, do you know that it's time to transplant? Mitchell, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well, it's for certain plants, if you can see the roots, like you should have openings on whatever kind of container you're using for the seedlings. But for some of my plants, for example, it has a lot of like green leaf, but then there's not a whole lot of roots at the bottom. But then some of my plants, the leaf isn't too tall, but then I can see tons and tons of roots coming out of the bottom. So when it's just super root bound, or I see the roots spreading out into the container holding the water, for example, I know those are probably ready to transplant as well. But no, I think you covered it very well. It really does depend on the type of plant, like you were saying, on how big you should let them get.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, just moving from there, uh, onto kind of just weather permitting type ideas on when you can and can't plant your transplants. So this is very relevant because I planted a few things yesterday, but I didn't get to finishing it. Just got too dark in the evening. And then today, when I was going to do the rest, it's storming and it stormed almost all night. So I cannot go out in the garden and transplant the rest of them, unfortunately. If it was like a slight rain, it'd probably be okay. And it depends too. You just need to look at your actual soil to see if it's, how flooded is your garden. Is the soil very wet? And in the case here, it's still raining and it's, 5 o'clock in the evening. So definitely way too wet outside, unfortunately. Whenever it's raining and it gets super wet, if you're out there in the garden walking around, you're going to be patting down the soil. It becomes just a little more susceptible to weight being put on top of it. And then that squeezes out a lot of the, just the oxygen and the small little paths that the roots will take. So if it is going to rain, Colin and I were talking, and about 2 to 5 days or so before the rain would be a great time to transplant your seedlings. Um, it's going to give them a couple days to establish and to really hook their roots into the soil that they're on top of. And then that rain is just going to do a fantastic job of watering everything completely, getting it soaked. And whenever you do transplant, you should also, well, like Colin said, you want to give it a spritz itself with your hose or whatever. And then this rain from the sky will just be a little extra and a little less off your back to where you don't have to water it yourself. And then, of course, when you're transplanting, you don't have to, but you should, especially for more plants that love the hot weather. You want to wait until your spring frost date has passed. So here in zone, around 7, it's around the end of April or so is the spring frost time here, and we actually had a somewhat of a late frost here at the very very end of April. So even if your spring frost date has passed, just give a look to the forecast 2 weeks or so. Make sure that there's no other frost warnings coming up. And besides frost and besides rain, if it's just going to be a very very hot day, just be a little cautious of transplanting there as well. Having a cloudy overcast day is pretty much perfect for transplanting because the sun's not going to be beating down on your plants as it would be otherwise. And like Colin was saying, hardying up your plants by taking them outside for a couple hours each of the few days coming up to your transplant day will really help them get used to how tough the sun's rays are if you've had them growing inside the whole time. But if you have to transplant and it's going to be a very sunny day, we recommend doing it either pretty early in the morning where the sun hasn't fully came out yet. It's not as hot as it's going to get during the day, or, which is what I prefer, kind of waiting until the evening where the sun is, starting to set. It's maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. It's getting a little later in the evening, but you still have a few hours to see what you're doing. And in that case, the plants will have the whole night to get their roots set, prepare, get accustomed to where they are at least somewhat. Then you have the morning, and then you have the next day where the sun's going to come out. It's going to be very hot for them, but they should be a little more accustomed by then. And I think that's about it for weather. I'm unfortunately still waiting here. Gonna give it another day or two. We're having more rain tomorrow, so I just gotta do with what we're dealt with. Can't argue with the weather, unfortunately. But anything that I missed weather-wise, Colin?
No, no, I think you really got it pretty well covered. Yeah, so I got lucky a couple times where, planted day after or 2 days after, got a really good rain. And I've always found that, those plants seem to kind of get established at a little bit of a faster pace than just the typical put it in, water with a watering can or your hose or whatever. But one kind of fun fact about the rain and how that water is a little bit different from just like your normal water is due to water getting struck by lightning, just a little bit of nitrogen gets sequestered from that lightning into the rainwater.
Hmm.
And then it just has like that ever so slight amount of fertilizer in it. Isn't that interesting? So
Huh.
that's one reason. I'm sure there are many others, maybe, just that it hasn't been filtered or whatever, gone through the, precipitation process. Who knows? Other reasons why it's really great for plants, but that I know is one that I've always found interesting. So anyway, moving on now to the next topic that we're going to cover, we're just actually going to talk about the physical process of how we go about transplanting a seedling. So, for some of you experienced gardeners, this is probably something that it may seem a little bit redundant, but just in case, this is something we wanted to cover, and maybe you'll even learn something that you didn't know before. So, obviously, we're going to take whatever pot that the seedling is in and dig a hole about that size in the spot where we want it. Now, we're going to take a little time later to discuss exactly how to choose that spot, but wherever it is, we're going to go ahead and dig a hole about the size of the pot. Going to be very careful to take out that plant. And then this is sort of, Mitchell and I were talking before this is sort of the crucial moment of inspection is, okay, we've taken it out of the pot. We don't want to keep it out for too long. We've dug our hole. It's about to go in. What do we do now? Right. So what we recommend is you want to check out the roots. So we want to see what color are the roots. We want to see them being a light color, maybe a light, like a pale sort of brown or white. Very good. If you see some really dark colored roots, it means that those are dead. That's something is going wrong there. Maybe they didn't have enough oxygen or were overwatered or dried out. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
You could probably figure out kind of by retracing your steps on the care of that plant. But what you want to see is, okay, it's taken up most of the soil in the pot, like it's holding it all in, but the roots haven't started to tangle together. So good color, minimal tangling, right? That's another thing we want to look for. If there is some tangling, don't fret. Just give them a bit of just break up a little bit of those tangled roots. Probably they're going to be near the bottom before planting. That'll help out. And then one thing that we also suggest is before putting the plant in is maybe adding something to the hole to work as a bit of a fertilizer for this plant. So there are a few different options here. We, of course, are going to suggest organic options. So there are a few sort of granular fertilizers that work really well in this, like a garden tone or something like that. Look for that in your local gardening store. Make sure it's a nice even distribution of nutrients, in that, and just sprinkle some of that in the hole. It's hard to kind of overdo that, but obviously don't go crazy with that. Another option, even going more organic, is the worm castings, which is what I do. And kind of an extra bonus with this, I use the worm castings as part of my seed starting mix. So these plants are already sort of trained to utilize the nutrients in the worm castings. So I've found really great luck with that. So I think that's pretty much the whole process of beforehand. Okay, so now we're actually putting the plant in the hole. It's been fertilized. We're going to take that soil that we dug up, go ahead and put it back on top, and then patting it down, making sure that there's no real air spaces in there. Any air spaces can sort of starve a portion of the roots from getting the proper contact with the soil and proper moisture that it needs. So we definitely want to tuck it in, is what I say. I teach at a few schools, and that's sort of the verbiage I use for the kids to understand what I mean. We're tucking it in, right? So making sure that there's no air spaces, that's really good. And then, of course, giving it a really, really good watering, just to, it kind of homogenizes the soil with whatever soil the roots were already wrapped around, so that they can easily spread out and start to access more space, and that they don't end up just staying in that little square or little rectangle um, that they started growing in, right? So I would say that that's pretty much the whole process. Mitchell, anything you want to add about the actual physical process there?
No, I think that was pretty good. Yeah, and don't. Sometimes my perfectionism comes out, and I like beat myself up. I was like, oh, I need to. Like I'll do it very slow and be very careful with it, and which is good. But then it's going to take you all day, depending on how much stuff you have. So don't be afraid. It doesn't need to be perfect. Plants are pretty hardy overall. If it's already like a healthy plant, it should do fine. Like I've seen tons of beginners give them like a decent explanation on how to do it, they do it and the plant grows just fine. So yeah, don't stress yourself out about it is probably all I would say. So once you are actually planting your plants, like Colin was saying, we just wanted to add a little bit on where exactly in the garden you should be, different types of plants, where they should be going, different factors you need to think about. So I definitely recommend to think about this quite a bit before you're actually starting to plant your plants, which is an issue I'm also coming up with. And Colin as well, I know you have some mammoth sunflowers that you're not sure where those need to go, but they're going to take up a lot of room wherever they do go.
Right, right, exactly.
Um, but yeah, I've got the same issue with my sunflowers. So one thing I was just reading the other day is that, for just one little tip, is that your really tall plants, if you can, plant those on the north side of your garden. So when the sun is going up over the sky, those tall plants aren't going to be shading any smaller plants that are around them. The smaller plants will be casting their shadows on, towards the north, which those tall plants aren't going to care. So for me, my tallest plant that I have in the garden was my red okra. So I made sure to put that on the north side, and then I have my corn, which is going to be just a little bit shorter, and then after that, it's just all a bunch of kind of random short things that I don't really care much about. But if they're all going to get sun at that point, and think about as well the different amounts of sun that each section of your garden gets. So if you're planting like near a building, is it only going to get sun half the day? Are there big trees around that are going to be shading out, some plant beds that you have? And so plants like okra, corn, like I was just saying, really, really love the sun. So you try to have those kind of more in the center of your yard. The cold, hardy greens, I would say like spinach, lettuce, kale. I find those, they like the sun, but if it's a really, really sunny day, they can kind of get scorched a little bit. So they don't mind a little bit of shade here and there. And if you have shady areas, it's not an issue or anything at all. You just need to be aware of that and then put plants there that will, benefit the most being in that area. And it's really cool too if you do have like a really shady area in your yard. For example, I have a neighbor's tree that shades quite a bit of, one area of my yard, quite a bit of square footage. So I just made that whole section a complete like shade garden. So there's plants like, I think like was it garlic, onions. They can kind of just grow almost anywhere. I feel like
Hmm.
especially the wild ones.
I always recommend like herbs, especially perennial herbs. Herbs are hardy to
Mm-hmm.
begin with, and if it's perennial, it's going to stick around for a while. So it doesn't need, like, it's not fruiting or something in a time frame. So it can kind of soak up the sun when it gets some. You obviously use what the soil has to provide and stuff like that. So yeah, yeah, I use the same method.
Mm-hmm.
I have three redwoods in my backyard and two in my front yard. And then I have another tree, some sort of, I'm not sure, an oak or something, in my backyard as well. So I'm really dealing with a lot of shade in my backyard, and that's my biggest struggle. If these trees weren't here, man, I'd be no problem sun on everything. But I really have to work
Yeah.
around that. And there is one bed. It's actually my longest of all of my beds. About half of it gets some pretty decent shade and maybe only 6 hours of sun, which is like just enough, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to grow like lettuce there, and like you said, I just harvest. That's where I planted my onions. Um, I actually found that there was a grub infestation. I was wondering, like, why did my onions go to seed in its first year? Must mean that they're stressed. And I thought it was because we had some extra rain. But then I actually found that there were grubs eating the roots. It's like, well, that'll do it.
Oh, so they're eating the onions basically. Then wow,
Well, there are
they're
little
or
roots that
the.
come out of the bottom, and I noticed that they
Mm-hmm.
were like when I'd pull that up and a little chunk of dirt would come with it. Sometimes when that dirt would fall, there'd be a grub or two. And so I
Oh,
like dug
that's
through
interesting.
everything and tried to find them all.
Oh, to get them out for next time you plant something.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
because
wonder if they
so
would
that's a
eat.
fairly new bed, so I know it. The problem isn't like really deep seated, so I just tried to get as many out. You know, tried to be thorough, and then hopefully it won't
Mm-hmm.
become a big problem.
Yeah, and that sucks. That's an issue you can't even see until you take the plants completely out. It's like then you're just. That's not
Yep.
something I don't. To be honest, I don't know how you would fix that if you're trying to
Other
keep the
than
plants alive. But
yeah, other than weird
yeah,
behavior out of the plants, right? Like that's the only thing
yeah,
you might notice. But
interesting.
anyway,
It's so shady areas, and that reminds me, talking about trees. Like if you're going to be planting fruit trees, be very wary that anything in a 10-foot radius at a minimum, I would say, is eventually going to be almost completely shaded out day to day. So just be cautious of that. um, Shady areas, raised beds. So I see a lot of people nowadays that have like a patio who maybe don't have a lot of land, a lot of grassy areas, just to completely put up a raised bed like on top of bricks, on top of whatever your patio is. And you could buy, I think Colin and I like to usually make our own to construct because it's not too bad either to construct yourself. But there are also, I think someone it was actually my dentist was telling me that she went to Sam's Club or something, and they had a raised bed, basically that
nice.
almost like an IKEA type thing, yeah, that you just buy and put together. So I was very happy. I was very proud of her. So, to talk plants is random. Um, when you're planting, leave room, a decent amount of room between your rows. um, I was looking online yesterday, and everyone was saying, and this is obviously not raised beds. This is just like if you're planting on the ground for the most part. You want to have some room to walk in between the rows to, pick the plants or just help maintain them during the growing season. So I was looking online and everybody was saying 3 feet, and I was like, why is that so consistent between different types of plants? It's like, oh yeah, you need to be able to walk between the plants. Like that makes sense.
Yeah.
um,
That's
and
also
when you're
big enough to fit a lawnmower through. So, like, if you're
mm,
planting, even if you're like setting up raised beds in a yard or something like that, 3 feet's a good, for maintenance.
yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think about that either. um, and as well, like I have a big garden bed that's completely fenced in. So for pest control, and I'm talking more so like animals rather than bugs. Um, so the any like rabbits, I don't have deer in my backyard, but usually I have a bunch of rabbits in my backyard, and if I plant a small green out in the yard, it's gonna get eaten most likely. So for me, my more susceptible plants, which I think would be like small bean seedlings, like corn seedlings, sunflower seedlings. Rabbits will eat those kind of easy greens like that. You want to have those in a fenced in area as best you can if you know that you have rabbits in your backyard, which you probably do, even if you don't know it. And then I have other sections that aren't completely fenced in that are kind of just randomly scattered throughout the yard. And that's where I'm going to put plants that rabbits don't really care to go after too much. And as far as I mostly know, like nightshade type plants, so they won't really go after tomatoes. They won't really go after peppers and like eggplant, but besides that, I'm not even too sure. Do you have any like rabbit slash protection tips at all, Colin? I don't know. You have a different kind of ecosystem out there from me, that's for sure, though.
Yeah, but there are definitely some big rabbits. My whole backyard is fenced in, so that helps there. There isn't much getting in. But I have started in my front yard, and I would recommend to anybody who's planting a garden, just plant a couple beds with some protection. Give yourself 2 to 3 feet of growing space above the bed, right? And then just cage it in with some hardwood cloth, chicken wire, something like that, because you're not going to regret it. There's going to be something in your garden that, man, the birds are getting to, or something like that. And you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
happy you have that, because you're going to lose it one year and then you're going to adjust, plant it in the protected area the next year. And there you go. Or you could use it, to easily lay some shade cloth on, and then some things that you want to grow when the sun is really strong, easy setup there, just a small adjustment. I would recommend for anybody who's really serious about planning a big garden to just include that in the plans. So I do have some deer out here and rabbits. And then also some crows that I deal with. So for that,
Oh.
in the front yard, I have full protection on beds. So they're about a 1 foot high bed, but the protection is then 2.5 feet of growing room. So I grow my lettuce out front, and I grow some pea. I'm growing some peas out there right now, because even in the backyard, so in the front yard, like, all sorts of stuff would get to it, but in the backyard, the crows were getting to it, but only when it was small. When it started to get larger, then they left it alone. Interesting. But um
Hmm.
so I had to figure something out back there. But then I transplanted some up into the protected bed, just as like a backup, right? A little security measure, and that seemed to work really well.
Hmm. Yeah, I have little tiny cherries forming on my tree right now, and I'm like, should I put netting on top of it? Like, I'm kind of nervous that the birds are going to get it before I do, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have a net ready. And then,
Yeah,
once they start ripening, that's when I see it. Like, I have a peach tree, and as soon as those peaches are ripe, it's like, yep, and they go in there.
yeah, they know instantly.
Yep,
I
they
mean,
know.
they're out there every day, so they're watching it, I'm sure. My brother's motto was always to grow enough, fruits for the wildlife as well. It's like you feed the birds and yourself. But
Yeah.
I
That's
feel
easy to
like,
say on year 10, but how about like on year 1, when you have like
yeah,
one precious peach, and the
yeah,
bird's like,
exactly.
just eat it. Yeah.
And I feel like you get more and more coming once they realize, oh, there's food here every year. They're like, this is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
And then one last thing to talk about where to plant is just companion planting. So we've kind of mentioned this throughout multiple episodes and today, but to talk about kind of the just specific definition, um, it's really just planting two plants near each other that have some kind of beneficial relationship between the two. So having one next to the other will help one of those plants in some aspect. And there's all different types of aspects. So just like we were saying today, having a big tree providing shading for plants that like shade, like technically that's companion planting. That would be a case of it. But there's lots of different types of cases. We've also talked about the Three Sisters method, where you have a tall plant like corn will provide a trellis structure to a plant that needs it, like beans. And then on the ground floor, the floors, you don't have any plants yet, so the cucumber or I think peas can be sprawling too, or squash, some kind of ground cover will be there, providing weed suppression to both plants on top. So companion planting just with three different types of plants. And there's a few different other types of companion planting is just deterring pests. So if you have one plant that gets aphids very often, there's plants that you can plant next to that one that deter aphids. Um, you can have planting, say for example, flowers in a vegetable bed, and if it's something like tomatoes that need that pollination to grow their fruit, the flowers will bring in, butterflies, bugs, different things to pollinate, bees to pollinate those tomatoes. We talked about shade regulation, supports. We talked about just like how the corn and the beans can go together, so like a natural trellis. Um, Improving soil fertility. I wonder, how you can have like cover crops, Colin? I wonder if you
Hmm.
can consider a cover crop kind of like a companion plant for whatever you're going to plant in the spring. I guess in a way.
I think that those are called pioneer crops. So that's
Oh,
like something that preps. So a companion, they're
mm,
they're there at the same time.
okay. Pioneer plants. There's another definition.
There you go. There's another fun fact for you.
um, yeah, and then weed suppression we talked about as well, just like the ground cover. But any other things you have on companion planting or any examples you've done yourself?
Yeah, just one more, a companion plant, the benefit, like we said, can be to both plants. They could be like to deter pests and things like that, but it can also be for the benefit of the gardener. So something that uses
Mm-hmm.
space well can be a good companion planting idea. So, something like, let's just say carrots that grow underground, interplanted into a bed that is mainly leafy greens, right? So not crazy deep on the root system of those, and producing a lot of top growth. So those two things work well together, and you can get kind of a double harvest out of a bed there, and use your space to its fullest. So companion planting, just all different definitions. It's just that kind of using that gardener's intuition to put plants together that can work well. So
Mm-hmm. And did we say anything about succession planning on
no, I
this?
think we should though. Yeah, succession
Okay.
planning is
Yeah.
just having. It can be through seed or through seedlings, um, you know, and even in your seed starting process, just having backups for especially plants that are going to be quick turnaround. So let's say you're wanting to grow lettuce to harvest as like a full head, a nice head of lettuce, right? Well, you're going to want to have like a lettuce seedling ready when you harvest that head to get going again, right? So that you can keep getting the most out of your growing space. Well, so that's a good example. Another example is,
Mm-hmm.
let's say you want to have you know, tomatoes or something. Well, that's kind of a bad example because there are tomatoes that produce, all year long. But let's say you want to have like some peas or something, and you want to grow a lot of them, but you don't want to have all the harvest be at once. So you plant a
Mm-hmm.
third of them one week, you wait a week or two, plant the other third, wait a week or two, plant the last of it, and then you're able to kind of delay a certain portion of that harvest so that you can harvest, enjoy, and then once you're finished, you have your next harvest to repeat that. So there are a few different ways to succession. So the final way, so we're kind of going from the shortest timeline of thought to the longest. The longest timeline of thought is like with a tomato or something that it's going to produce all its fruit at once, and in your particular zone, maybe you have time to do that again before it gets cold. My zone is one of those, a zone 9, pretty warm. So if you get an early enough start, you can grow your determinate, pardon me, tomatoes, get a full harvest of like your Romas or something, then have another Roma ready to go. And if you get that in right as you're harvesting, it can grow up and give you another harvest before fall. So using then your seed starting setup to its fullest, as well as the growing setup to its fullest, to always have those plants ready to go and really make the most. And you can see, I'm sure if you look long enough online, people that are using this so well, they're taking a small space and producing just an absolutely unbelievable amount of food. So they're using the
Mm-hmm.
companion planting with the succession sowing and getting these great beneficial relationships in such a small area, growing a ton of food, and then always switching that out at a moment's notice. And those are the people that are really doing crazy, crazy things with like a patio garden, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was
Anything you have to
perfect.
add there?
No, I think that was pretty good. I know you and I both talked about like we've done most of our transplanting already. Now we're kind of thinking about what else. Like our seed starting trays are free and open, so what else can we start to grow? And
Right.
yeah, especially things that can grow after summer into the fall once you've already done a harvest of your first initial round of crops. So like my corn, you harvest that once and then the plant's pretty much done. So then what else can go in its spot for the rest of the season?
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, using as much garden space as you can, that's just very beneficial, very recommended.
Awesome. So, do we want to talk any about kind of how we're using some of these tips currently in our garden?
Yeah, sure.
So, I'll go ahead and start. So, I know that we are both doing the Three Sisters method. Here's the state that we're at currently with that. We've got our corn in. We're waiting for that to get a little bit more established before planting the beans around it. And then we are going to, for our ground cover, some have used squash and different things. We're going to use cucumber as our ground cover, as that's going to be kind of the best for our situation. So we're going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
One of my
Do
favorite
you
companion planting situations is the tomato basil combo. But what did you have to say?
Oh, I was just going to ask if peas can be used as a ground cover as well. I read one article that said it can, but I don't know if you want to have that on the ground or not, or if it needs a trellis. I've never grown peas before, so I was
Yeah, I'm
curious.
growing them right now, and I've had a really good. My first year growing peas, it went super well. I got like 7 feet tall. I just must have gotten them right at a good time. In the
Mm,
summer, peas have a harder time. They sort of get replaced with beans as it gets warmer, so it's starting to get where I am a little too. It's starting to get a little too hot for peas to start peas, and also they're very thin. So with these kind of what I would look for in a
mm,
ground cover, a productive ground cover, is like a huge leaf, right? Like
yeah.
how we want to produce something on this plant, obviously a vine of some sort, which peas have too, but then we want something that's going to cover a lot of dirt. So what do we have with that? So I think that the cucumber leaves or something like obviously the squash have big leaves, right? I think that's our best bet for the Three Sisters there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I was leaning towards too. And something else that I've done here as well for a couple years, actually, when my brother lived here, is we like to plant strawberry plants underneath a lot of our trees and things that don't move around. Just that basically act as a ground cover, kind of like you would do with squash for the Three Sisters.
That's a good
And you
idea.
get delicious strawberries, yeah, each year.
Oh man, my strawberry, I have a strawberry that's probably about a year old now, and it is just going crazy. I've been fertilizing it every once in a while with like a berry tone, and it's got leaves that are like as
Mm.
big as my hand. Like the set of 3 leaves is as big as my hand.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and they're like
Oh
starting to
wow. I
stand
don't get
up and
that
they're
here.
producing like 20 flowers. It's crazy. I don't know if I'm going to get
Mm.
strawberries out of all of those, but man, they're really happy.
I think you should. Yeah, I have pretty good success once the flowers out for strawberry plants. Yeah, I almost always get a fruit.
Yeah, I'm starting to see just my first couple popping up.
Mm. Oh, berry tone. I've never seen that before. I just googled it.
Yeah, I think I used the one by Espoma Organics.
Mm-hmm. That's the first one that pops up. Organic, natural. Huh.
Yeah.
Is that just used for any kind of berry plant, basically?
Uh-huh, and grapes too. Works well for grapes.
Interesting. Yeah, because I have a really crappy blackberry, not blackberry, blueberry plant. So I think it
Oh,
could
you
use
might
some
want
berry
something more
tone.
specific for that.
Really. Because it's
But
on the
I mean,
picture of the container, but yeah, I don't
oh,
know.
well then use it. I'm sure it's fine. But
Oh.
if the acidity isn't the problem, then use it. But if the acidity is the
Yeah,
problem, then maybe add coffee grounds or something.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, it depends on the issue.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm.
All right. Well, I think we've covered all that we really wanted to cover on the whole topic of you've got your seedlings, what to do now, right? So hopefully that was interesting for everybody and you learned a little something. If there's any topic on this range of advice that you would like to see covered more, let us know. And always check out more information on any of this on previous podcasts, on seed starting and any of that. We have podcasts on all of those, and also on the website howtocultivate.com. So we hope you guys enjoyed this one, and we hope you join us next time. See ya.
See you later.